What's up, guys? This is Ben here. We're bringing you another video. Today, we are continuing our post-Call of Duty Champs recap content around the teams that made it to the event. We haven't yet done off-season recaps for all these teams, so we're doing that now. Today, we're going to talk about the New York Subliners, probably one of the more interesting seasons so far this year. Let's talk a little bit about it. They have a lot of decisions to make in the off-season, a lot of big names that might potentially be leaving or joining this roster. So we're going to step through some of those and then wrap it up with our final thoughts. Let's get into it. So for the New York team in Cold War, it was not an amazing season. They pretty much finished as a top 6 team, even though they were probably playing at points better than a top 6 team. They had a couple of different looks throughout the season. This is the year, remember, where Zuma was on the roster and then ASIM joined and DiamondCom was there for 5 seconds because Clay was benched himself, and there was a lot of fucking drama on this team. So they finished the season with Mac, ASIM, HYDRA, and Clayster as their 4, and they made a lot of changes in the offseason. Mac went to Seattle, ASIM went to LAG, and then the team brought in CRIMSIX from Dallas Empire and brought in Neptune from the Florida Mutineers. So an interesting squad of players. They basically tried to build their own version of Simp and Abizi, and this is sort of a somewhat like run back to what Crim and Clay did on Dallas Empire back in Modern Warfare. I bet you that was with 5 players, but they basically were like, okay, me and Crim are going to handle like all the AR play, and you guys hit routes in front of us, make the frontline plays. We're going to gaff them, make the correct plays, and we're just going to outsmart the hell out of people. And that strategy worked really well in Modern Warfare. Like, they were on top of the meta and executed that to perfection. So I think before we even talk about Major 1 qualifiers, like, these guys streamed a lot of scrims, and, you know, when the season started, there was clearly a lot of tension with the team. You know, Clay and Crim are players that have a very specific mindset, and that's putting it politely, to how they want to approach practice. And I think they were a little hard on their teammates and on themselves and to each other. And it definitely felt like something was really funky with the New York camp at the beginning of the season. And they did not have a good start to the season. 1-4, they lost to FaZe, they beat Boston, lost to LAG, LA Thieves, and Seattle. So they had to start, unfortunately, in losers. And with starting in losers, sometimes you get an unlucky draw coming from the bracket. They end up playing Thieves, and they pull up to the event at Esports Stadium Arlington, play 3 maps, and then they pack their bags and they are gone. The absolute worst start for a New York team that people thought would be a real contender. They were sitting at the bottom of the league in real trouble early on in terms of keeping pack with teams for qualifying for champs. They got Clay and Crim on the team, and they're struggling for qualifying for champs. So at this point, they end up like really pulling the trigger early on some changes. They do a couple of different things during this period. They tried to swap royalty for Neptune, and they don't really get amazing results with that. They end up kind of having Paul fall in their lap and end up rotating him in for Clayster. Basically, they decide to bench Clay. They say, Clay, you're not playing well at this point. We'll take a look at Clay's numbers. We'll talk more about Clay at the end of this video, but it's not a good fit. We want to try something else. Paul was kind of filling in on the London team for a sec on a 14-day, and then they kind of let him walk, and New York was able to pick up Paul, which ended up being super key for them at the end of the season, and we'll get to that. You know, just a lot of bouncing back and forth between Neptune and Royalty and Paul X on this roster. They're trying to find the squad of 4 that like works, and a little bit of inconsistency from week to week. New York actually do end up playing pretty good though in this qualifier set. They actually do qualify for winners. They beat Toronto, they beat Paris, and they beat Minnesota. They do lose to London, and they get 3-0 by Florida. But the lineup that they end up rolling out is HYDRA, CRIMSIX, Neptune, and Paul X with Clayster on the bench. And New York have to play FaZe first, and that is a massive mismatch for them. FaZe send them packing in like 30 minutes. Not a particularly close series. And New York is bounced to losers, and they pull up on Friday, and they continue their span of not really winning any series at these majors, and they lose to LA Thieves in a game 5, and they're in real trouble at this point. Another top 12. You made a lot of roster changes. The only points you got on the board are the matches you won online. They're in mega trouble as they get to the back end of the season and qualify for champs. So you get a couple of weeks break in between Major 2 and Pro-Am. They end up making another change. And this was probably a big change and definitely improved their season a lot. They go ahead and they grab Kismet, a player who was on Paris at the beginning of Modern Warfare, was bouncing around challenges for a bit. And so they round out, this ended up being their kind of final roster for the season. HYDRA, CRIMSIX, Paul X, and Kismet. And they get drawn in a group with Thieves, London, and the Team War squad from Europe. New York actually dominate their group, only losing 1 map, and that was to Team War. They 3-0 Thieves, 3-0 London, and they qualify top of the group out of Group C into the bracket stage for the Pro-Am. And New York go a bit on a run. They 3-0 Paris in the first part of the bracket. They then in semis beat Toronto, and they get some revenge against Thieves. And very surprisingly, before this tournament, I don't think anyone was sitting here like New York are the favorites. New York get it done and actually win an event this year, a surprising development. And so we go into the Major 3 cycle, and they're behind the 8 ball on points, but you're feeling a little bit better about this New York team. Maybe they have a shot. They got to make up a huge gap on a lot of other teams. And you got to remember, this is like LAG was starting to round into form. So like some of the teams that were struggling in Major 1 and good Major 2s. And so New York was a little bit behind the ball in points. Going back and talking about the qualifiers before we really jump into the tournament, New York do go 3-2 and advance through winners. So they lose to Atlanta FaZe again. They do beat Boston, Optic Texas, and Paris, but they do lose to Toronto in Game 5. At the event in Toronto, the woes for New York at majors continue again, guys. Unfortunately, they lose to Seattle in a Game 5, your eventual event winners. And New York then get bounced by London. I would say a supremely disappointing series for New York. And as good as they played online, and they were looking like maybe the #1 hardpoint team coming into this game, coming into this event, they don't win another. They're completely continuing to whiff in majors and have made up some ground, but they are still in real trouble. And at this point, like for Major 4, like they basically have to get to grand finals to essentially have a 100% shot or hope that things go their way. And things don't necessarily go their way in Major 4 qualifiers. Yes, they went 4-1. They got a top seed, but all the other bubble teams around them played pretty good during this qualifier stage. So they really only made up like 10 points here and there on some of the teams. New York was able to get it done against Florida 3-1, LAG 3-1, 2-3 against Thieves, 3-1 against Optic Texas, and 3-1 against Seattle. So a really good showing from New York. And here's where we get into real, like this is like the do or die territory for New York that's going to make their team. And it's a home major, right? Kings Theater, Brooklyn. I was there. It was super loud. A lot of excitement. They started off against a Minnesota team, and they have a really slow start in that series, but they reverse sweep, and they get it done, and they advance to face Florida, which was a massive matchup because they were basically kind of in the mix both for that last spot, and they really need to beat Florida to have a chance to make it to champs, and they get it done in 3 maps, absolutely mollywop Florida, and make it to winners final. Finally, New York is playing good at one of these majors, and they're in the mix on Sunday, and they keep it rolling. They take out the Thieves team in 4 maps. By doing that, they qualify for champs, but making it to top 2. Huge weight off their shoulder. It's got to be one of the best comeback stories we've seen so far in the regular season. And what a great showing from New York to get it into the finals. Thieves end up re-meeting them in finals after Thieves beat FaZe in losers finals. And while New York does go up early in the best of 9, Thieves kind of outlast them. I think the Gavitu control in the middle of the set was a big momentum turn. And Thieves do get it done in 8 and win 5-3. But for New York, a top 2 at Major 4, you're feeling pretty good going into champs that you're going to be one of the contenders at the event. Unfortunately, guys, for New York, when they pull up to champs, they don't really get the result that they wanted. They have to face off against FaZe to open because New York snuck in as the 8th seed. FaZe are the 1st seed. They go up 0-2 against FaZe, and FaZe actually reverse sweep them. So a real tough loss for a New York team that had a legit shot to make a kind of a pretty crazy, I wouldn't say a crazy, actually, let me take that back. I wouldn't say it's a crazy upset, but I predicted FaZe to win that series. I think a lot of people did as well, but it would have been massive momentum for New York to keep it going. New York do end up then having to play London in the lower side and lose round 1. And London play much better at this tournament they have in the past. And New York clutch up in the Game 5 to stay alive in the tournament. Unfortunately for New York, though, they have to face an Optic Texas team that was coming off a tough 3-0 smoke show from Thieves. So you get a classic rematch, a nice Scump versus CRIMSIX matchup on a Saturday. And unfortunately for the boys on New York, they get trounced on the first 2 maps. Crim was having issues with his setup, so they had to redo a bunch of stuff. It was a massive delay. They pull up to a Gavitu control, and New York make it interesting, but they can't get it done. And Texas closed them out. And unfortunately for New York, this is the end of their season. They end up placing top 6 at Call of Duty Champs. Taking a look at sort of some of the overall numbers here to kind of finish the recap, and shout out IOU Turtle for the sheet. So Subliners are another team that basically played like kind of 500 ball. You see the hardpoint stats here are probably their best game out. It's even more wild if you look at by stage. In stage 1, they went 0 for 10 to hardpoint. So they were in an 0-10 hole. If I remember correctly, actually, they also lost like the 3 first hardpoints they played in stage 2. So they actually were like 0-13 to begin a hardpoint. It was actually kind of wild. But they do actually end up going 7-2 after that in their next 9 to start to rebound on the hardpoint side. They play pretty good at hardpoint and pro-am. It's not listed here, but they go 8-5 in stage 3 and 14-4 in stage 4, 2-3 champs. So they ended up the season really strong in hardpoint. And especially also another thing of note here too. I think the big thing for them when they got to land was their improvements in S&D actually. Desert Siege S&D became sort of a bread and butter for them in Major 4. And I think that was a lot of the reason why they were able to make the deep run in Major 4 and qualify for champs. Taking a look at some of the overall stats for this New York team, and shout out Easy Mac for this sheet. It's not a pretty picture from a slaying standpoint for this team. Clayton and I have a good season. No way to really sugarcoat it. I mean, it was poor by his standards. 0.84 is just not going to cut it overall. Like, that is ugly. I think the 0.93 from CRIMSIX is also not particularly good this season. I know they had a lot of struggles. I know he played better at the back end of the season. But I just, overall, like, you need a little bit more from Crim, and he's got to kind of figure it out going the next season, how he can sort of hang a little bit more with some of these newer players. Another fantastic season from Hydra, but we'll get to his situation sort of in a sec. And for Paul and Kiz, you got a lot of production out of them. They were solid from a slaying standpoint. And we see royalties numbers there. Not a great showing from him. Was probably put in a tough spot, honestly, but didn't do much to really push the stock forward. So let's talk contracts. So here's the situation for this team. You have Hydra and Clayster coming over from the Modern Warfare season. So both of them are free agents. Everybody else is sitting on a team option that includes your boy CRIMSIX. Immediately, I see a couple of different things here. One is, I think Clay is gone. We can basically remove him from the picture here. They're not re-signing him. I think he's probably going elsewhere. I would be thoroughly shocked if they brought him back. Hydra is immediately your offseason priority. You need to re-sign this guy. If they lose Hydra, would have to really be in the market for another aggressive sub player, and there are some options out there. Afro, potentially, Standy, but I think those are probably downgrades from Hydra, and you're not getting Pred off of Seattle, or you're not getting one from Optic, you're not getting one from FaZe. So if they lose Hydra, they're going to lose a lot from the slaying standpoint at that position. I think you probably take the options on Kiz and Paul, and probably punt on making a longer term decision on that too, but like, if you can, like, here's my thing with New York is I see basically two schools of thought on the New York team. Do you run it back or not is basically the question. You can make the argument that they played pretty good at the end of the season and that you probably should give this roster a shot. But I don't know if the team feels that way from my understanding of the camp and the way the camp is right now when I'm recording this video. I don't know if their default position is to try and run it back with this forward. They may want to make a change or two. And obviously the Hydra situation complicates all of this. I think we look at sort of potential options for them from a player standpoint. Let's talk about free agents. From a sub side, I can see Afro sliding in here and doing a pretty good job. Him for Hydra's a pretty like for like. I think Hydra's probably a little bit better, but you're still going to get good production out of Afro. I just don't know what Afro though, if you're going to kind of have the same problem. Afro's a player at the end of this year that really did struggle with some decision making. So I don't know if that really upgrades your team in that area. They can get kind of interesting if they want to get big with the ARs here, because you have this big Wake and Skies duo, and they were pretty good in Florida. You maybe insert them in the New York situation. Dylan Attach, bring him back. He was on New York on the first year of CDL. Trey Zero also was on New York during the first year of CDL. And look, we'll bring it up again. Illy and Shotzi are technically free agents. I'm sure New York's going to talk to them, but I just don't see either of them putting themselves into this situation. I think with New York, though, they're definitely someone who I think could be very active on potentially the sort of buyout market. And that gets sort of a little interesting, right? You look at some of these teams, like, I don't think they're going to be able to get one on FaZe. Maybe Havoc's an interesting option if you want to go down sort of an SMG route, someone that's a veteran experience, probably not too expensive from a buyout standpoint. I don't think Boston's really going to make a move on any of their guys, so that's probably out of the picture. Technically, Don's got a team option on Paris, but I expect Paris is probably just going to let all those players lapse and then re-sign them. But I don't know if they're willing to run it back with Don. Don, aka Temp, was another player who was on New York the first year. LAG's an interesting one to me. A couple of ex-New York players on here, a lot of team options, a lot of decisions for LAG to make. And there are players on here that could address some of your needs. Asim and Slasher are two players I could see them potentially going with down the line. I don't know though, LAG's a team with a lot of money. I don't know if they're going to ask for reasonable buyouts. So that one might be a little bit of a stretch. Obviously, everybody's going to ask how much Pred and Mac and Sib cost, but I don't think either of those are doable. But I know that at one point or another, there was interest on Sib at one point on the New York side, way back in the day, aka last season. And then Mac was obviously on New York before. They know how good he is, but I just don't see Seattle letting these guys go. And then rounding out sort of the other two teams we got here. So London's a lot of free agents, so there's not really a lot from a trade situation. And then Toronto, potentially, and this one's sort of the interesting one to me, when you look at sort of Insight and Cammy And if Toronto wants to move on from those guys, I could see New York maybe getting in the mix for those players. So I think my kind of overall thought on New York from an offseason perspective is they can either run it back or not. And if they're not going to run it back, they have a wealth of options to choose from, depending on what route they want to go and what players they're going to swap out. I would say from my position, I don't think you let Kiz and Paul walk. You don't know what's going to happen with Hydra, so that might be a thing that you're going to have to fill. And do you run it back with Crim? So I think 2 changes is likely here, likely for a main AR player and a substitute player, sorry, not substitute player, an SMG player, if you're unable to re-sign Hydra. Well, let me know what you guys think. I think New York's probably going to be a hot button topic. They're an interesting team. Let me know in the comments what you think they should do, who they should pick up, who they should drop, who they should trade for, all that jazz. If you like the video, smash that like button, hit a sub on my channel. I always appreciate that. We're pumping out more content continuously for you guys over the next coming weeks and months. So stay tuned for that. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much.